In this dense forest, amid mountains, rivers and hills, investigators are at work. They are combing an area where bones belonging to Emile Soleil were found on Saturday, near where he was last seen by neighbours walking alone in July last year. He was just 2.5 years old.
Welcome or welcome back, and thanks for being here. I'm Cassie, and this is A Wicked World. The story I have for you today is about a toddler who went missing one day from his grandparents' home, located in a tiny village in the French Alps. When he was later found, it wasn't in the condition that anyone hoped. And soon, strange details about the case began to emerge. This is the story of Emile Soleil. Emile Soleil was born on November 11, 2020, to his parents, Marie and Colomban Soleil. While not much is known about the adorable blonde-haired toddler, it's said that he was a sweet boy who loved chasing butterflies outside. Emile's family lived in La Bouillabaisse, a small town located not far from Marseille, France. But on the morning of July 8, 2023, Emile's mother, Marie, dropped the toddler off at her parents' holiday home that was located in the tiny alpine hamlet of Les Vernet, which was home to just 25 permanent residents. Marie's parents, Emile's grandparents, were named Philippe and Anne Vinoviti. They had 10 children together, with Marie being the oldest. So that day when she dropped Emile off with her parents, in the home it was Philippe, Anne, Emile, and 9 of the little boy's aunts and uncles who were between the ages of 7 and 18. That morning, some of Emile's young aunts and uncles had been building a cabin a little ways away from the main home, while Emile was happily playing outside in the garden for much of the day. The little boy would go inside for a mid-afternoon nap, then head back outside to continue playing. His family had been watching him for much of the day, but around 5 p.m., his grandfather, Philippe, left Emile alone in the garden for about 15 minutes so that he could load up his vehicle with metal stakes intended for building a horse fence. A witness would also later state that they'd seen the grandfather chopping wood around this time. However, when he went back to the garden at 5:15 p.m., the toddler was gone. Emile's grandparents and other relatives who were at the home that day began to search for him for close to an hour. But after finding no sign of him, they contacted the authorities and reported the 2-year-old as missing. Within less than an hour, this normally quiet area was just crawling with volunteers ready to look for Emile. The search for him would go on for days, with more than 500 people, police dogs, helicopters, and drones equipped with thermal cameras joining in. Police even had Emile's mother aboard a helicopter, using a loudspeaker to call his name out, hoping that this would work. But there was still no sign of him. Dogs, however, did pick up Emile's scent in 2 different places, both within about 20 meters of the grandparents' home. But after that, there was no further trace. This suggests that the little boy might have been picked up by a vehicle from that point. All 30 buildings that were in the small hamlet would end up being searched, as well as 12 different vehicles and over 30 acres of land, but still no Emile. In addition, 25 of the residents were also interviewed by authorities, and 2 of them would say that they had seen Emile walking down the village's only street, about 20 meters away from his grandparents' house, or 66 feet. This was around 5:15 p.m., about the exact time that his grandparents had discovered that he was missing. These witnesses, whom authorities said were both trustworthy individuals, said that they were not concerned about seeing Emile all alone that day in the road, because in that village, it was very common to see small children playing by themselves. Emile's grandparents were additionally interviewed by police. However, they were unable to provide them with any further information that would assist in finding the little boy. By July 13th, with still no sign of Emile, the large-scale search for him was called off. Then, just months later, on March 30th, 2024, a woman was out hiking when she came across a human skull and a few teeth. It was near a river, down a steep embankment, on a narrow forest road that was about a mile or a 25-minute walk away from Emile's grandparents' house. Instead of immediately calling police, though, the hiker decided to scoop up the bones, put them into a plastic bag, and drive 10 miles to the nearest police station. She told authorities that while she didn't want to destroy any evidence, she didn't have a cell phone signal, and she was afraid that if she left the forested area, she wouldn't be able to retrace her steps. Once the bones were examined, it was determined that they did indeed belong to Emile. It was also found that the skull had some small fractures and cracks on it, along with bite marks that looked to be from one or more different animals. Now, authorities claimed that the location in which the hiker had found these bones had already been previously searched during a sweep the summer prior. They did say, however, that the thick undergrowth and the high temperatures of the summer could have possibly affected the sniffer dogs during their initial search. So once again, police went out to this area to see if they could find anything further. And just a few days later, on April 2nd, another discovery was made. About 150 meters or 490 feet away from where the skull was, a yellow t-shirt, underwear, and shoes were found. Soon after, a small bone fragment was also located nearby, all of which were confirmed to belong to 2-year-old Emile. As a result of authorities' further search, the entire village had been closed off by forensic teams. And quickly, local and national speculation began to swirl. Some people thought that Emile had been killed by wolves, which they claimed tied in with the bite marks that were found on his scattered remains. The area was known to have a large wolf population, and in 2017, the then mayor of La Vernay said that he had seen wolves crossing the village road, which was viewed as giving weight to this animal theory, a theory that was later disproved. Some others believed that a 16-year-old boy who had previously been irresponsibly driving his tractor and had damaged Emile's grandparents' home doing so had been the one who accidentally killed the toddler. This tractor had also been seen on the morning that the little boy vanished. Some also suggested that maybe he was hit by a car as he was walking through the village alone, and then the driver had sought to hide their crime. This theory had come because police had actually found some blood on a suspicious car, though it was later determined to belong to an animal. But there was even more people that were convinced that Emile's death was an inside job. That his family, whom there were at least 10 of on the premises the day that he disappeared, knew far more than they were letting on. Perhaps coincidentally, the boy's relatives had just days prior to the discovery of his remains done a reconstruction with authorities of what possibly could have happened to Emile. Upon further examination, it was determined that Emile's body did not actually decompose in the clothing that had been found, and his remains had been moved to the forest before they were discovered. They had never been buried. Additionally, based on the decomposition of his remains, detectives believed that Emile's body was likely preserved in a protected environment, like a freezer, prior to them being moved to the wooded area. They were also pretty sure that they had just recently been moved there. Making this even more suspicious, the fractures on Emile's skull showed that he had suffered from some violent facial trauma. So authorities now believed that the little boy did not just wander off on his own, but rather he was murdered. However, no arrests were made quite yet. This wouldn't come until March 25th, 2025, when in the early morning hours, police raided Emile's grandparents' house and placed them and 2 other adult family members under arrest. Philippe and Anne Vinoviti were arrested alongside 2 of their adult children, though they haven't been publicly named. All 4 adults were arrested on suspicion of voluntary homicide and concealing a corpse. The family's horse trailer, SUV, and various other pieces of evidence were also removed from the property that day. It's said that at the time Emile's family was arrested, there was also a large flower pot that had blood on it that police were able to obtain from a church that was nearby, though I'm not exactly sure what that may have to do with the investigation at this point. The family's arrest had come after police had secretly been wiretapping them for months and listening to their private conversations. Apparently, one of the things that they had heard was that Emile's parents had suspected his grandparents in his death, even though in public they were showing a very united front. So even though it looked like there was being some progress made in Emile's case, just 72 hours after the arrests were made, his relatives were released with no charges. Now, there was something else odd that had happened recently. And that was just weeks before Emile's family was arrested, that their 85-year-old Catholic priest, Father Claude Guillot, had ended his life via a massive overdose. He had been the family's priest for quite some time, even baptizing Emile. But while he had been very close to the family, Emile's grandparents in particular, they had had a falling out since the little boy went missing. Apparently, Father Guillot had provided a photo of Emile to the media after he had gone missing, only to then be condemned by the boy's family. The picture was said to also have Emile's parents in it. And the motivation for him providing it was not necessarily to find Emile, but rather to counteract the view that some people had of Emile's father's political viewpoints. Apparently, back in 2018, the boy's father had been arrested for an attack on foreigners. And he'd been an activist at the time who was linked to Action Française, the notorious far-right nationalist and loyalist group. So Emile's family did not appreciate the priest talking about them or sharing photos directly with the media, saying that it was essentially a violation of their trust. A very public fallout had then ensued between the family and the priest. So Father Guillot, taking himself out of this world, had made many people very suspicious that he knew something about Emile's disappearance and death. Because taking your own life in Father Guillot's religion is considered the ultimate sin and is pretty much on the same level as committing a murder. Following his death, the priest's sister Claudine would say, "I'm very angry with Emile's family because I think it all started with them." It also emerged that Emile's grandfather, Philippe, had previously been investigated in relation to a completely separate case. A case relating to allegations of physical and sexual abuse that had occurred at a Roman Catholic school in the 90s. At the time, Philippe was training to be a monk, as well as working in a Catholic community that included a boarding school for troubled youth in northern France. During authorities' investigation, Philippe's students described him as being a violent authoritarian, something he would admit to, saying that he did administer somewhat harsh physical discipline. But in the end, while some of Philippe's former colleagues were indicted in relation to the allegations, he was only ever questioned and considered to be an assistive witness to police. He was never charged in the case and has always denied any wrongdoing. Following Philippe's time in this Catholic community, he gave up being a monk in order to marry his wife Anne, though the couple still remained rigidly Catholic. Emile's family had always practiced traditional values in the home too. His grandfather had homeschooled all 10 of his children, something that was quite out of the normal in that part of France. Others who lived by the family described them as being very secretive and discreet, always keeping to themselves and being quite self-sufficient. So many people have theorized that Emile's grandfather, Philippe, who had very traditional Catholic values, a hot temper, and violent means of discipline, had lost it with the 2-year-old that day back in July, which had resulted in a terrible accident. Then Philippe, his wife Anne, and the rest of the family that had been in the house that day helped to cover up the crime. Further adding to the suspicion that many have in regards to Emile's family was the fact that his grandparents were said to not have helped with the initial search for the boy. And they were rather gruff with those who were searching for him. One of Emile's teenage uncles also made the interesting statement that it wasn't surprising that something had happened to the toddler because of his behavior. Either meaning that he wandered off on his own because of his behavior, or he was doing something he shouldn't have and got punished because of his behavior. Little Emile's funeral was just recently held on February 8, 2025, at Basilica of Sainte Marie Madeleine, and there were several hundred people in attendance. Well, thank you for listening to Emile's story today. It's hard to say exactly what happened to him on that day that he went missing. While there are multiple things that make his family look very suspicious, I guess there is still a small possibility that he was abducted and killed by a complete stranger who then stored his body for a while before dumping it off in the woods. Though there is also not much known about the woman who collected the bones, put them in a plastic bag, and brought them into police. So could she have more to do with this? What do you think about this case? What do you think happened to Emile? So if you like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. And turn on your notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is at least 3 times every single week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care, guys. Bye. Thank you to all the patrons of A Wicked World. Now, there's even more of A Wicked World on Patreon, so check it out on patreon.com/awickedworld, or use the Patreon app. You'll have access to exclusive videos each month and more. Any support truly helps to make sure the victims are never forgotten and to highlight the shortcomings of society associated with each case. Do you have a suggestion for a story you'd like to see me cover? If so, send me an email to awickedworldtruecrime@gmail.com.